Good morning, everyone. Thank you for taking this time to join us. I hope you can all hear me clearly. If you are having any trouble with the audio or anything, just type us some messages again and we'll try and work it out as we go. I'm the CEO of Provisio, and we're certainly very excited about the system we've been able to build to date and the journey we've taken to get here, but we're just as excited about the journey going forwards and where we think scaled advice can go and what it can mean to all of us trying to run efficient and profitable practices in the advice industry. The dashboard you see on the screen here is essentially the kind of the heart or beginning point for Provisio. Basically, you'll see here the 6 advice topics that Provisio covers by within its repertoire at the moment. I'm going to focus primarily today on the first 3, which is the Retirement Adequacy, Contributions Optimizer, and Transition to Retirement, because these are the 3 modules that, used with your clients, I think you can significantly change the value that your advice software may actually provide in terms of the engagement and education aspect of dealing with your clients. If you're comfortable enough, then you can use it for doing what-if analysis, sitting with the client, giving them instant responses to that, and then very rapidly generating advice content that you can then start incorporating into your statements of advice. Some advice groups that we deal with have been generous enough to share with us the amount of time they're spending on SOAs, and I would say the recurring theme at the moment is that most of these businesses would agree that the time and cost to generate statements of advice at the moment are not just too high, I would say they're spectacularly too high for these businesses. And the goal of Provisio is we're trying to be a system where ideally you can generate 80% of your advice content through us, and if we can do that in an hour, then that's going to be a significant time saving over what you're doing currently. And when I say an hour, I think I'm really incorporating in that the meeting with the client and asking them lots of questions, because the actual generation of the advice itself through Provisio is significantly quicker than that. So I'll start today by, you can just open any of these modules directly and start doing modeling with the client straight away. Hang on, I'll just zoom that out so that you can see it clearly. So I mean, you could actually just start plugging numbers into this and generating things without using it as a client, without having a client record attached to it. But generally, if you want to be able to generate advice content from it, then normally you would either create a new client, or for the purposes of today, given our time constraints, I'll open one I've created earlier. But the data requirements in Provisio are very light. We aim to get you to the point of being able to model calculations as quickly as possible. So in this client record, I've got some personal details for the client, but predominantly the main things I have is his date of birth, his income per year, some details for his wife and what her income and super balance is, and finally I have the client's superannuation balance. If you've already generated advice, then it also tracks your advice history, but today I really want to focus on the early stages of using Provisio and how you go about generating some advice content from it. So I'll start with our adequacy module, which is our retirement income module. And the goal of this module is to convert the way you present retirement outcomes to a client and make it all very much income focused. So over on the left-hand side, the tool has brought across the data from the client record. So I have my client's salary, his superannuation balance. I have the same thing again for the partner. If I click Optimize, the tool's now going to go away and work out what is the flatline level of income this client's going to be able to afford based on a certain life expectancy projection. Now, in this setting, just scrolling down, I'm asking for, I think I've got it set to be 4 years beyond life expectancy. So the $63,000 is the amount this client could afford to retire on if we were aiming to have their superannuation deplete 4 years beyond their current life expectancies. So let's assume the client has no target income. I'm just going to turn that off for a second. This is more an example of what this might look like the first time you run an adequacy calculation with your clients. I normally have my admin staff populate the calc before the client comes in, but if it's a brand new client, then I can populate it with them while I'm sitting there. But the information it's telling me is that is the income they can afford to retire on. It gives me a little bit of an idea about what their capital is, but it shows me their life expectancies, and here it has given me 4 years beyond the life expectancy of the longer of the two. I have some graphs that I can take them through that show the capital and income visually and show it all on a table basis, but generally when I'm presenting to my clients, I wouldn't spend too much time on those screens. Predominantly, I want this to be the starting point. So my client now understands that he can afford to retire on about $63,000 a year. In this case, my client's old enough that one of the strategies I want to talk to him about is transition to retirement. The purpose of this module is actually to help explain transition to retirement to the client, understand the benefits, but for him to understand exactly what it is I'm talking about. So again, basic level of inputs come through. It assumes by default I want to match the client's current net income. I can change that, but in my experience, 85% of the cases you do with TTR, you are matching the client's current net income. So I can straight away say to my client, I can add about $54,000 to your super balance if we were to run transition to retirement, and I keep your income the same as what it is today. These tabs across the top here are actually additional panels that I can walk the client through to help him understand what's going on. For your benefit, behind the scenes, Provisio has actually tried every amount of pension it could have drawn and every amount it would have needed to salary sacrifice to give me the net income that I was after, and it's picked the one that gave us the best benefit. So a big part of Provisio is using what we call optimizers. So as an advisor, you pick the strategy that's appropriate, and then Provisio does all the complicated maths to give you the best answer in a matter of seconds. So if I click to the strategy overview, what I now get is a very detailed comparison of what the client was doing before and what I want the client to do in the after scenario. So I can walk him through the fact that he was only doing an SG contribution before in this case. I'm going to get him to do some additional salary sacrifice. I'm going to pay him a taxable pension because he's under the age of 60, but I'm going to leave his net income exactly the same. Importantly, you can click through the additional years of the strategy, and that can be quite useful if when you first see a client it's not the 1st of July, it might be the 1st of April. Well, then in Provisio you can actually come in and under the assumptions we can say, right, let's start this strategy on the 1st of April. And it will now build us a real-life strategy for the client where for the first year we've got 9 months of the year had already passed before we saw the client. So I can either show him the amounts just for the next 3 months, or I can show him what it looks like including the annual figures. But when I click through to year 2, now I can walk him through the significant differences of what this looked like in the first year and what it looked like in the first full year that he'll be running it. If we step back a level, if we go to the year by year tab, this is now taking a step up and showing the client their net income before we ran TTR and their net income after. In this case, as you'd expect, as I've matched existing net income, it's the same. But the column I want the client focused on is this is how much extra he had in superannuation as a result of doing TTR each year. Particularly useful is at this stage in life they often don't know when they're going to retire, so if they thought it was somewhere between 63 and 65, I'll just run the tool through to 65 and say to the client, well, if you make it to 63, then you're $32,500 better off. If you made it through to 65, you're $50,000 better off. If we have the privilege to be dealing with an accountant or an engineer who wants to know a lot more information about this before they're willing to take our word for it that this works, the 4th tab actually lays out their personal tax return and importantly shows you the tax savings both inside and outside super. So I'll just click to year 2 because this was the first full year of this calculation. And you'll see that while we're showing a rather large income tax saving here of $5,700, I'll zoom in a little, once you add in the contributions tax we've paid, because we've moved him up to a full $35,000 contribution next year, he's actually only $1,200 better off in terms of how we've distributed his income. A significant part of the saving in year 2 is that this $376,000 super fund is now in pension phase, and that's actually driving the benefit under the age of 60. And that's not unusual. For those of you who do a lot of TTR calcs, it's pretty standard. Under the age of 60, this is largely a superannuation tax saving strategy. But if I click forwards a couple of years, that's the year where the client now turns 60. Suddenly the benefit jumps considerably because now he's got 100% tax-free pension. So there's enough information there that you can explain this strategy very quickly to whatever level of detail is appropriate for your client. Importantly, as we run each calc, they sit over here on the right-hand side. So I can now start modelling additional strategies with this client. Let's say it comes out in the discussion the client's got $50,000 in a term deposit or a bank account that they could actually consider moving into the fund. If I run this strategy, I now obviously get a different benefit. But importantly, the two strategies are sitting here on the right-hand side so that I can show the client how this has changed. So I can build the strategy up in front of the client. And I'll show you now some of the more expanded areas of input. While on the top left-hand corner, that's a fairly basic sort of client scenario. If I click into client details, you can actually supply a lot more information around other income they might have in addition to salary, if tax deductions they might have, salary package, tax-free income if they're working for a not-for-profit or the health organisation. You can set this value in your preferences so it's globally, but you can also add it here. You may well have to leave an amount in accumulation to actually start the transition to retirement strategy. You can change levels of SG the clients have. You can change the level of contributions they may already be making before we started talking to them about transition to retirement. You can also open up the events table and change some of the inputs year to year. So this is where the client might be actually going to go to part-time at some point during this strategy, whether it be for 1 year or multiple years. You can factor all of that in. The one I'll activate today is you can also refresh the pensions. So it could be that come 1 July each year we're actually going to collapse the existing pension, roll in the money we've contributed for the year and restart a brand new pension. So if I go and turn the reboot on, I run the calculation again. So now I've got 3 stages with this client I can talk them through. We started with a $50,000 benefit. In the second one we got him to put in some money through his term deposit. Now we've got a $57,000 benefit. The third outcome was if we did a pension refresh every year, there was a $63,000 benefit. I'll just go back to the vanilla one. Let's say we're keeping it simple and he just wanted that one. If I click import to adequacy, it was really important in Provisio that once you did a transition to retirement or a contribution strategy, you could roll that in and show the client what the retirement outcome of this was. So now if I've rolled this forward, so I'll just go and turn Centrelink back on. Let's turn off the target income. And if I run this strategy now, it's now going to give me a new retirement position. Just give that a few seconds to think. And now we're able to show the client what their new expected income position is as a result of having run the transition to retirement strategy. Now, what I normally do with my clients would be I want them to understand that today I had a strategy that added $50,000 of benefit, but for most of my clients I want to focus on what their target income might be. So let's say this client, we've got the ASFA modest and comfortable figures in here, but let's say the client actually has a specific target income in mind. Then we can put that in. Now what Provisio will do is it'll still focus very much on the income that they can afford to have so that they know what that number is as a benchmark, but it will now show what the outcome looks like with them drawing the $75,000 a year. Come on. So the significant impact from this is I want the client to understand that at retirement they're about $295,000 short on where they need to be to bridge that gap. And if they were to draw the $75,000 based on the super balance we project them to have, then the super's actually going to run out when they're both 79 years old. Now, for the client, that's 4 years less than his life expectancy. For the partner, that's 7 years under. So they can understand straight away the implications of what we're doing. Now, with my clients, this becomes a big part of my ongoing review offering with them. So each time my clients come in, I actually present to them this stuff on screen, and I give them documents like this to basically take away, which is, in essence, a retirement review document that's not focused so much on product. This is entirely on the strategy of what kind of retirement income are they going to have and what are the steps they need to take to bridge any gap. So again, if I'll just come back to our first vanilla adequacy calculation, I'm just going to go and put in a target income again that was higher than what the client can afford to have. And Provisio will actually automate for us the recommendations that they would need to do to bridge the gap they have. And when I'm doing my ongoing reviews with my clients, I want them to focus on this income and how it moves over time, and I want them to understand what the actions they need to take. So here we had a client who was going to retire on $63,000 a year. They've told us they want $70,000. So the system tells me straight away, well, if we were to increase contributions, then we need to contribute $16,300 of their net income a year. I could achieve this with a higher growth rate. Now 10 is probably too high. I'm not going to talk to that to being a solution. I'm currently using 8 for this client, but if I was projecting a rate at the moment that was like 4%, well then if 6 was a solution, then maybe having a chat to the client about their risk profile might be appropriate. The third lever that a client can generally change is they can work longer if they wish to. So they're the 3 things the client could change. And for my business, if a client comes in now after a market downturn, the important thing is they see that their retirement income has fallen, but retirement income falls by a lot less than capital. If you'd looked at the 2008 calendar year, superannuation balances, a lot of them fell by 25 or 30%. But if you'd focused on retirement income, then for a 45-year-old who's going to retire on $50,000 a year, the reality was at the end of the year he was still going to retire on $48,500 a year. It just wasn't that big a difference. And the reason is 1 year returns don't make that big a difference in what is often a 60 or 70-year retirement projection if you take up accumulation and drawdown phases. So focusing on retirement income to a lot of extent takes a large amount of the volatility out of what our clients see each year when we talk to them. Okay, so that's the adequacy tool and the way it does its sort of suggested actions and things. I've talked you through the TTR tool and the different panels we have there to explain a strategy. I'll just come through now and I'll show you the contributions version. So this is a tool largely meant for, I guess, someone under the age of TTR, but who has an amount of surplus income that they're willing to consider putting into superannuation. So at this point I'm going to put $100 a fortnight into the fund. So I've got a reasonably low income and superannuation balance. The tool is going to automatically optimize for you the blend between concessional and non-concessional contributions. So in this case, straight away it says that the client has told us they can afford to contribute $2,600 a year in income. If they do that, then we're going to add $3,460 to their superannuation fund, so they're $860 better off. That $860 is a 33% return on the money they gave up. If I come to the strategy overview, we'll see a panel very similar to what we had in TTR. But in this case, what it's showing me is this client's just eligible for a bit of government co-con. So the first thing it did was work out the non-concessional contribution to get that. It then worked out that if we had $2,600 of total income to give up, that is the amount of salary sacrifice the client could afford to do. So we have a panel that shows exactly what the contribution numbers are, but I wouldn't ordinarily talk to the client about that in a meeting. That's something that would appear in my advice content. Now, we've done these modelling. Now how do we actually turn it into something useful? So if we go and click on Export Document, so I'm happy to generate a Word document, here's where we will have some standard white label templates that you can use, but you can also customize these templates more for yourself if you wish to. We have a wizard tool that will help you do that, and you can also come back to us and we can do this for you. But if I pick the SOA template that I want, and I pick the topic, hang on, let me go back and pick one of the ones I was doing for John Smith. So for John, I have retirement and TTR calculations up here, so I choose the ones I want. Let's say I wanted that adequacy calc and that TTR. If I click export, then in about 5 seconds I'm going to get a document out of the system. I actually have a multi-module SOA here I can show you that kind of shows you what that document looks like. So this is the kind of example of Provisio white label SOA content. So we have a number of different ways of generating documents. I'll show you the full SOA first. So we can make copies of these available and sent out to you guys, but the idea is we very much try to replicate some of the stuff the client's seen on screen. So if we've done retirement planning, then we lay out a panel in the SOA that's very, very similar to what they've already seen. As I scroll down, there's a goals and objectives. It populates one goal and a best interest paragraph for each of the objectives you've run. We're now into the TTR content. So a big part of what we try to do is create visual sort of flowcharts and things. So, and I'll just put that down so you can see them side by side. We lay out a flowchart showing the client the before scenario of what they were doing before we did TTR and the after scenario of what it looks like now. That all generates automatically. Those flowcharts populate all the numbers and everything into them based on the calculations you've run. We make it really clear what the contributions and pension amounts we want the client to draw for both the first and second year. The reason we give them 2 years worth of numbers is, again, largely if you're seeing a client near the end of the year and it might be the 1st of April, it's highly likely you won't see them again before we need them to implement those new numbers starting 1 July, and you can talk them through that. From here on, it starts to explain more of the stuff that they've already seen on screen in Provisio. So what was the year-by-year benefits? What did the tax table look like? We also have a PAYG table set that populates, because one of the challenges with TTR calcs is the pension provider won't withhold enough tax. I don't know if you guys have done enough TTR calcs or have experienced that before, but at least here, under the age of 60, if there is some pension tax to be withheld, it will highlight that so that you can make the necessary adjustments. We're now into some super contributions output. Probably the primary focus here is we do have a nice neat flowchart again that shows the difference between before and after, walks the client through the outcomes and their overall increase in super. So again, if I was presenting this document, I'd probably focus more on that page than anything else. If we get into retirement planning, I'll show you a dedicated retirement review document in a second, but it puts through the retirement content. And if you configure Provisio, then we can also do some of the insurance and income and investment recommendations as well. But I'll touch on that briefly at the end, but it's not really the focus for today. In terms of other sorts of advice documents we can generate, we have strategy papers. So this is basically taking the TTR content you just saw in the SOA, but generating it in its own standalone document. The primary reason for this is it makes it a lot easier to incorporate Provisio advice content into another SOA process you might have. So whether you're using Coin or another financial planning system, or potentially hacking your SOAs together out of Word templates, which is an answer I get back more often than I would expect. It's quite easy just to take this content here and essentially paste that straight into any advice document you like. If you're doing advice for the husband and wife, then generate a TTR strategy paper for each of them and paste it into your SOA where you want it. We have some summary papers. We have one for each strategy basically, but the idea is this is a document that, forget the AMP branding, this was branded up for use at an AMP conference. They're actually just Provisio standard documents. It was just the last version that I branded. I'm not showing you any particularly sensitive AMP document. But this summary document that I'm showing you here is the idea of something that you could give to a client at the end of the first meeting potentially. It's just a calculation benefit. So it explains what TTR is, it talks about what the benefits were off the calculation we ran for them, but it has absolutely no recommendations in it. It doesn't talk about a pension product to be acquired, it doesn't tell them what pension to draw, it doesn't tell them how much to salary sacrifice. It's just if they're leaving that first meeting and you want to give them something that says, look, I have a strategy that can help you here. My SOA fee might be $2,500 or whatever it is, but here is the benefit that I can offer, then that's something they could take away. And we have some dedicated review documents that we've spent some time on. So the first one is an example for someone who hasn't got a target income yet. So we help them work out what a realistic target income would be, and in this case the document picks out 70% of their current net income and has the two ASFA modest and comfortable standards in it. The exact same document, if you nominated a target income, which certainly the hope would be by the second or third time you've seen the client you've been able to do that, then the same document appears, but now it makes it more clear what their target income is and starts to explain, in this case because there is a shortfall, that 131,000, the steps they would need to take to bridge that gap. What I'm normally trying to establish in my client's mind is the benefit I have to offer with my strategy today. So if this was our first meeting, then my goal would be to let you know that I have a strategy, in this case worth $57,000 for transition to retirement. And I want you to understand that you have a $131,000 shortfall in terms of where you want to be for retirement, and that's the thing I'm going to help you solve over the next 10 years. So very clearly as a client you understand that I've got a benefit today, I've focused you on the retirement income that you're going to have, but I've identified the shortfall and the money I'm going to have to help you make up over the next 10 years to give you the retirement outcome you want. And each time you come and see me for my ongoing review, then I'm going to revise this retirement projection and represent it to you. So if the markets are cooperating, then the income figure might be climbing faster than we were expecting, but conversely if it's falling, then your income is falling and I'm helping you understand the adjustments you need to make to get back on strategy. Okay, now I'm not sure how many of you present here may already be an active user of Coin. but I'm just going to very quickly show you how this connects to Coin. This won't go for more than 2 or 3 minutes, so for the guys who don't use Coin, please hang around. I won't spend too long on this. But this is the Coin workbench. So if you're in here, basically Provisio becomes one of your icons up here. You can open Provisio anonymously, where you're just going to do some modeling for a client you've never used before, or you can nominate a client, and this will now connect to Provisio for you. And essentially, once it connects, you end up with an experience that is very similar to what I've just taken you through. In this particular instance, my license here allows me to have 3 modules. Whichever modules you had access to would appear across the top. The only difference is if you run this via Coin, then we populate a landing page for you that is in essence the adequacy calculation pre-run. So it tells me the income that this client can afford, and based on their target, it already lays out what the shortfall recommendations are. But this is no different than you just clicking the adequacy tab and running the calculations yourself. It's just we automated it so that you can have a landing page. If you click Save to Coin when you finish an advice session, then it will actually go and save the SOA into the Coin document list, which is presumably where any other SOAs and things you've been generating previously live. Okay, so I'm just going to flick open the agenda here and make sure I'm covering things off. So hopefully we've covered off a little bit about engagement. Somewhere near the end of this, I'll spend 5 minutes showing you the sorts of interfaces we've built for clients to interact with directly, because a part of Provisio's offering is that you can put these tools to your website and allow people to interact with them. We've done the generating advice content more efficiently, strategy summaries, strategy papers. Okay, I think at this point the member tools actually might be the next thing to show. So what you're seeing here is the Provisio white label adequacy interface for a client or member to interact with directly. So it's powered by the exact same engine as what I've just shown you for the advisor interface. So if you put the same numbers in, you would actually get the same answers. So if we just go through a process here, so it asks my income for employment. Now by default it's asking for the income as before tax including super. You can actually configure based on your client base how you think they most commonly answer that question. But they can also click this tab here and change it. So I can change this to be $60,000 including super, excluding super. I can put in that I get paid $400 a week after tax, and it'll work out what your annual income is. Do I have any other income? Let's say no. My primary super balance is $60,000. Do I have any other super accounts? I'll say in this case no. Am I making extra contributions to super? Let's say I am. I'm making $2,000 a year. I don't know when I want to retire. If I did, it would have just asked for my age, but let's say no. Do you know what income you want in retirement? It was really important for us that this was not a compulsory input. If I say no, then the tool can still run, and in this case it's going to focus on telling me what I can afford to have. It's worked out in this particular instance that I'm eligible for Centrelink, so it asks me whether I own my own home. Yes, say I do, and I have $20,000 of other assets. So it's now able to make it clear for me that I can afford to retire on $38,500 a year including Centrelink. If I was happy, in this case I've set the interface here to be 5 years beyond my life expectancy. And again, you can set what you want your longevity assumptions to be. But from here, the client can actually interact just with the sliders here. So let's say the client wants $45,000 a year. So the calculation updates. Now, I'll just zoom out a little. But now we have a problem. The super is now only going to last until the client's 80. Their life expectancy is 85. So if I click Show Me, the tool now has some recommendations to help the client understand what they want to do to change this. It's going to suggest they could make extra contributions or they could work longer. In this case, they say, look, actually, I'm happy to consider making the extra contributions. All right, that will solve your problem. Do you want to take action on this? If they click Act Now, so this is an interface designed for your public website. So the idea would be we didn't know who they were when they started using the tool. They then populate this information and you will actually be sent an email, and in that email there is a link. And when you click on the link in the email, you will actually end up basically a screen that looks like this. You will have the exact calculation that that person on your website's just finished running, but you will have it inside the advisor version of Provisio, where you have access to a lot more inputs and things that you can manipulate and interact. The member tools or client tools have been deliberately scaled back in terms of the complexity and the number of inputs they have. But we actually have tools. We have essentially client tools for basically each of the modules that we run. So I'll show you another one might be transition to retirement. So we'll just run through this quickly. So male, 58, let's say I've got $75,000 income, 200,000 in super. Let's say I'm not making contributions in this case. So very similar questions to what I'd asked before, but now this one's designed to help them understand that if they were to run transition to retirement, then we could increase their account by $44,000 over the next 10 years, but we keep their income the same as what it is now. If they click the little table here, then they can see it as a table format. But from here, they're free to basically adjust their take-home pay. Let's say I decided that leading into retirement, I could afford to live off less. Then now they're going to live on $45,000 a year instead of their current net income, but we could now put an extra $165,000 into super as a result of them doing the TTR. Again, if they click Contact Us, then we ask for a series of information to be filled in, and then you get sent that exact calculation for you to then pick up and do stuff with. So while it would be usable for a lot of your existing clients, there's also the hope that if it's sitting on your public site, then it may also generate referrals for you too, with members of the public or referrals from other clients and things using this stuff and then sending you through information. It also shortcuts some of the fact find information you've got to gather for the client, because all of the information they've input into the system gets fed through to you automatically. That's probably the heart of what we wanted to present today. I've gone through the advisor offering. I've shown you some of the member or client interfaces, and we can certainly send links through to everybody that has the white label versions of each of those for you to look at. We've gone through the advice content. I'll talk a little bit to the product modules. So Provisio does have, while I focus largely today on the strategy modules, Provisio does also have product modules. So we have a super comparator, we have an insurance tool, and we have an investment choice tool. I would encourage you guys to, if you get access to the system, to have a look at those in your own time and come back with any questions you have. But I'll just sort of show you the investment choice tool and the way that works. So this is designed that at the moment you would configure it for a particular segment of your client base where you had a platform in particular you wanted to write, whether it be ABC, super fund, or whatever it was. And we would configure in this for you the investment options that you'd be able to see. So let's say it was in a product with 150 investment options, they would appear here. And you would configure what your risk profiles are, so whatever 5 or 7 different risk classifications you have. And then you would configure how they map to your investment options. So in this case, a growth client in the mythical Provisio Super, I've got it set up fairly simply that he goes into a multi-sector option for 100% of the account, and it just depends, the multi-sector changes with each risk profile. But you could just as easily configure this to be a model portfolio of 8 or 10 different investments of different weightings, and basically you configure that, and then the purpose is the Provisio that can then take that content and put it into an advice document to go along with the other strategy content that you've generated. You can actually have your risk profile configured within Provisio too, provided it's just a series of multiple choice questions with each response having a weighting. And if you choose to do that, well then you can have a screen similar to this to basically do the risk profile with your client. But if you've got another process that works fine for this, then you don't need to do the risk profiling through Provisio. All that happens is when you finish doing your risk profile, you just come in and pick what the client was out of the risk profile list, and that will run fine. The super comparison module, this is one that was built in conjunction with one of our clients specifically, and they had a fairly specific set of requirements. So we are going through the process of improving this a little, because at the moment what it really is a fees comparison tool. It doesn't have a lot of information in it around the features and benefits of particular funds, But if your goal was to considerably speed up the population of your replacement product advice table by filling in all the fees and everything, then this tool would actually do a very good job for that. So let's go and nominate. Let's go and say someone's got some money in Australian Super. As that is the first fund I've entered, it assumes that that is the active fund, and that's where their SG is going. I can change that, but that is its default assumption. It also assumes that they are 100% invested in the default option of that fund. Again, I can change that if I wish, but in this case, let's say they are. I can also override the fees for any particular fund if I wish to, particularly useful if someone's in a legacy product or if they're in a corporate super fund. While I will have the rack rates for Plum Super in here, for instance, virtually no one's paying rack rates. So for the particular employer they're in, you'll need to go and just override the fees that we've got. Let's say they've got Australian Super, CBUS, and Colonial First State Personal Super. Okay, so our client has those three superannuation funds. Here's where you would pick the fund you want to compare them to. As Bendigo were kind enough to help us develop this product, I will use theirs as the basis for this. So by default, if you enter the data that way, then it will compare Bendigo to the current basket of funds they have, and in this case confirms that we're $50,000 better off from doing so. And if we go into the fees panel, it gives us a very detailed breakdown of what the fees were in Australian Super, what they were in CBUS, including an exit fee, what they were in Colonial First State First Choice, and what they are for Bendigo. But it all gets summarised up the top to show you what the difference was in first year fees and what they were over the 20 years. If we come back to this screen, some groups I know when they do compare super, they want to compare to each of the funds the client's in now as well. So if you wanted to do that, then it just means you come in and under the comparison funds, add back each of the funds the client's had now. Now when I run the calculation, what's going to happen instead is I'm now going to get the 5 lines. So it could be this is how you prefer to do your comparisons, in which case now it's going to list each of them, show what the comparative outcome would have been if you'd rolled all of your money into each of those funds, and again shows you all of the fees. Now it's particularly useful if you're just trying to populate fees into replacement product advice table, then that's what you use this for. In terms of something to demonstrate in front of clients, that's probably only hugely useful if the product you plan on offering is cheaper than the stuff they're already in. If that's not the case, and certainly several of the products I use wouldn't usually come up as the cheapest, I actually tend to use this more to document stuff into their SOA. My clients buy the strategy advice from me. The products I use to implement it isn't really what I spend that much time talking to them about. So showing them the fee comparisons in a meeting wouldn't be something I'd do even if I were cheaper. But that's up to you. You certainly can use the tool in front of the clients, and it will do the fee comparisons. The stuff we're hoping to bring out around June will put a lot more of the features and benefits comparison stuff in here as well. So we have an insurance module, but at the moment it's tied to trying to recommend. It'll do a needs analysis fine, but when it does a recommendation, it's tied to an insurance product inside Super. We do have ways you can use it just to do the needs analysis where you tell us after that what product and premium you want to use, and we can put that into an SOA. But this is another module we're working on that the goal is that before June we'll actually have a solution that will have all of the research comparisons to allow you to work out someone needs $1 million worth of cover and then document that into an SOA. But the actual flow of the tool is not going to change. So if I go through and put in someone's income, you nominate the sorts of cover you want, and while the one here is meant for super, so it hasn't got trauma, the version we're going to bring out will include trauma as well. But then you get a fact find here where basically you come through and populate the sorts of cover the person or the debts they have, any annuity income you want, so you can go and fill that in as a budget by picking all the items as a line item and adding it for each one. But let's just say at this point I want income for my wife. I would have $35,000 for the next 15 years. I'm happy to consider my existing super, and I've got some assets that I could sell if I had to. For the income protection, the fact find is normally a lot more basic. You're generally going to recommend they take out the maximum cover they're allowed based on their current income. You can change that, but in this case I'm not going to. And if you have a fund with different waiting periods and benefit periods configured, then you can choose from the drop-down list for that. Let's say I have some existing insurance. So a lot of the information that appears on the screen is actually needs analysis based. So if I scroll down, this is the stuff that doesn't matter how you use the tool. It's going to go and total up what is the amounts of cover the client requires. So they needed 310 for their lump sum, they needed 458 for the annuity, they had some existing resources, so all up we need $700,000 worth of cover. Because they have $100,000 of cover already, they need $600,000 of new cover. The rest of the stuff is where, if we've got premium comparisons and product data in here for you, then it will start doing premiums. So in this case, the first year cost to do this cover is $277, and over 10 years it would be $4,200. There's a table further down that compares their existing cost with their recommended and what that is as a total, and you can flick that to show it per month, per fortnight, per week, whatever you like. And again, click a button at any point during here and you can generate a statement of advice that pulls any of these modules together, and hopefully in a matter of minutes you've got a statement of advice combining what could be anywhere from 1 to 6 different advice topics into it. So that sort of brings to a conclusion the demonstration of the Provisio capability. We think it will allow you to change the way you use advice within your advice software within your practice. It gives you the option to start using some of this stuff in front of clients and using it to help educate and engage with them. For those of you who are a little less comfortable using technology in front of a client, one of the advisors in my practice was that way for a while as well. All we used to do was have the admin people populate the calcs before the meeting began, and then all he really used it for was a demonstration tool. So he would already have the TTR calc sitting here when they came in, and all he would do is walk them through the panels to understand what was going to change and what he was doing. He wouldn't actually model it in front of the client. So that's a very good starting point for how you start using Provisio, and then as you get more comfortable with it, you become willing to start playing around with it in front of the client, which certainly is something I do and I encourage other advisors to do as they get that level of confidence. We're getting some very good stories from the member tools. If you put them up on your website and you do have a site that gets traffic from your clients, then they'll start to use this and you start to get information back, particularly as things change. We found for our advisors that their clients will go to the site and play around with something if there's a change in their scenario, and just the fact they're playing around with it, it then creates the trigger or the link to the advisor, and in some cases we think it has created a conversation that may otherwise not have happened, that has created a window for that advisor to go in and there was an opportunity for advice. Not being able to hear you all at this point is a bit strange, because normally by now I'd be starting to get questions, but I haven't seen any come through. Nirupa, you haven't received any questions? I'll take that as a no. So either I've done a very good job of explaining this or I've confused you all completely, but thank you very much for your time. I certainly encourage you to continue to have a look at the Provisio system. Please engage with us, speak to Nirupa, myself, other people within our company to find out any questions you've got, seek answers. We think this system can make life a lot more efficient for you, but we're also not saying we've got all the answers yet. This is a system that's going to evolve, and really the more feedback we get from the advice community about what this needs to do for everyone to gain the most efficiency out of it, then that's how we'll adapt our roadmap as we go. So we are certainly...
Cam?
Yep.
We have received a few questions.
Oh, sorry, I was looking at the chat window. There's actually a separate question panel.
Yeah.
All right, hang on. Let me see.
Can you see the questions?
Can't say it's a...
So the first one is this cloud-based? Does it work on Mac?
Sorry guys, let's go through this. So is this cloud-based? Yes. Does it work on a Mac? Yes. Because it's cloud-based and it runs through your browser, it should run on everything. Importantly, it'll also run on iPads. It'll run on, well, not just iPads, it'll run on virtually any tablet. It'll even run on stuff as far back as Internet Explorer 8, because we've got some corporate clients who are still on computers that are 1,000 years old. So, it should run on just about anything. Can you tailor SOAs to suit dealer groups, setup and compliance? Absolutely we can. At the moment, we've got banks, large industry funds, we've got all kinds of groups using our software, and most of them adapt documents for their own use. Some of them take our library of content and use that quite heavily. Others have completely scratch-built their own advice content or advice documents, and we've just helped them code it. We're also happy to provide you the tools to let you code the documents yourself. We're not particularly fascinated with trying to do that. Can breaches be highlighted better? Example in red. I'm not sure I entirely understand the question. Possibly we're talking about if someone's contributing more than the caps or something like that. I'm guessing. The tools at the moment allow Provisio to basically override their existing levels of contribution. So if you put in that someone was contributing more concessional than was the cap, then in the recommendation we would dial it back anyway. That would happen automatically. But there isn't currently something on the screen that I guess draws attention to a breach. From strategies to implementation and product selection, how does it work on the SOA populated through your software? Okay, I think that question's probably related to as I was doing the demo, I'd done the strategy modules and I hadn't done the product ones. So if you've done a TTR strategy, done a retirement plan, and then used the investment choice module to put a recommendation through to ABC superannuation fund, then that would all come through to the statement of advice in one go. So it isn't doing anything automated behind that in terms of automatically adding a product recommendation. You would use the product modules to control that process. Insurance product comparison. Okay, so I kind of addressed that's one of the enhancements for the insurance module. At this point, we hope to have that completed by the end of June. It might be before that, but certainly June's kind of our estimate on when we think that will happen. Can Provisio replace any other major and known FP software in the market? Okay, it's not an engagement tool specifically. It is a rapid advice content tool. So that allows you to do education and engagement, and it will allow you to do statements of advice on certain topics. And we're kind of working on the basis of the old 80-20 rule. We are hoping to have a system that will generate your statements of advice in 80% of cases, but you will still need a capability within an advice business to be able to generate SOAs outside of that. Like, I don't expect we're going to become a strong gearing tool. I don't think that will happen. We will slowly expand some of the functionality of adequacy to give you better capability with non-super assets and things. Like, it's doing Centrelink projections now, so you can factor in the assets they have outside super to get the retirement projection and all of that right. But we're certainly not a detailed cash flow modelling tool to the strengths of what a coin or an X-plan might have. But the reality is in 80% of cases you often don't need that power. In fact, you spend hours trying to get that projection out and then you skim through it in the SOA and the client doesn't even look at it. So I think the answer is we want to be able to generate advice content for you in 80% of the cases. Depending on the scale of your business, you will then decide how you generate advice for the other 20%. So if you're a coin client who's using the coin integrated version of Provisio, then great, you'll be able to swap between the two pretty seamlessly. But even if you're not, then you decide whether you have internally the capability to do that other 20% of the plans, or do you send the other 20% to paraplanning? Because there's a very real chance that Provisio might significantly reduce the amount of money you have to spend on paraplanning, because we can generate a lot of the content for you, and then you only use paraplanning to either wrap up a Provisio plan because there was something you wanted to do outside of Provisio that was part of it, or it could be that you only send to paraplanning the 20% of plans that weren't Provisio-based ones, and hence that should be a significant cost saving for your business. Could we have a recording of the presentation? I can see that it is being recorded.
Yes.
Assuming that is in a format that isn't ridiculous and there's a way that we can post it so that you can get to it, then I certainly don't see a problem with that. I expect one of our purposes is to put it up ourselves. So
That's right.
what is the educational time to get comfortable on the system? So we don't traditionally get a lot of calls to our help desk on how to use Provisio. It's very intuitive in terms of just populating the inputs, and then it builds the strategy for you and guides you through kind of what you would present to a client. So I would expect that answer is reasonably short. What you tend to find is as you start to use the system to become more comfortable with it, you actually start to ask us questions more about why did the optimizer do something. So in a TTR case, there might be times when you expect it to draw the maximum pension and do a massive salary sacrifice, and it elects to do a much smaller amount. Now sometimes it's because it works out we've reached the point of tax-free income because of all the different tax offsets and something the client has. It could be any number of things, but there are times when the optimizer might do something that just isn't intuitively what you would expect. Now while you can override the optimizer and tell it to do the TTR how you want it, often they're the kind of questions we have. It's more getting a really detailed understanding of the optimizer once you've already become familiar with its basic functionality and seeing how it works. What are you using for populating the Word template? So there are no macros in the document currently, although I have used them at various points, but currently the question was how are we populating the SOA Word documents? So there's not macros in them at present. It's using a language of Word. Microsoft Word supports a thing called doc variables, and basically we have a doc variable library now that Provisio can populate content into. Actually, I'll see if I can have an easy way to show how this works. Hang on, I'm just going to turn on the Provisio helper. With a bit of luck that will appear. Might not. There we go. So this is the wizard that we have available to allow you to edit Word documents. So anywhere in this document, I could say, right, I'm going to go and add a variable here. And I think Word's still dealing with the fact that I've just turned this add-on plugin on instead of having it on when I opened Word. But basically, running across the top there, you have the capability to insert a doc variable, and basically it gives you a drop-down list when the add-on's actually running, and basically it just gives you a menu structure where you come through and nominate the doc variable that you want. It gives you a list of the modules. Let's say it was adequacy content I was doing, and then it has a list of all of the doc variables. If you scroll over them, it'll actually tell you what they are, and it also allows you to choose what year you want to have appear. It could be you want the first year, it could be you want the first full financial year, or it could be you want the last year. You can nominate that, so basically it has all the different docs variables, and you just pick one, and it drops the code in for you. In terms of what the code actually looks like, that's the real code. It's a doc variable code, but the reality is the wizard makes that pretty easy for you to put that in. You can also add section removal bookmarks. So the idea is content that should appear or disappear on a conditional basis is you put a bookmark around it, and then basically, so within Provisio, if I wanted that section of text to be conditional, I could come in here and say remove section based on the client's start age being greater than 50. So I could either have it set to show if their start age was greater than 50 or remove if their start age was greater than 50. And we have section bookmarks for all kinds of things for most of the modules. So between being able to drop numbers in and being able to set up sections of text that appear or disappear based on certain conditions, that's about 90% of the functionality you need to go and build an advice document. We also have some tables and graphs and things that you can put in as well, which kind of rounds out the visual elements. But when you were looking at things like those flowcharts I had, really you could design your own flowchart completely because all it is text boxes that you just go and drop doc variables into. So if you didn't like my TTR diagram, you could change it and make one that suited what you think presented better. The price of 3 strategies, is it not too high per month? I don't know. I mean, I don't believe the pricing of Provisio at the moment is particularly expensive. If you could generate one plan a month out of this that you didn't send to paraplanning, then I actually think it's probably paid for itself. And I think that's a pretty low-end level of usage to obtain out of Provisio. Certainly if you're generating a couple of documents out of it a month, then you're well and truly in front. And I think if you look at what it adds potentially to the engagement process in terms of hopefully the benefit your clients get out of the meetings and things they have with you each year, that I actually think Provisio at the moment is a really, really cheap solution. Particularly, as I said, the groups are sharing with us, they're spending about 15 hours per SOA at the moment. If we can cut that down to 2, then I actually think we're doing very well. There must be a set of asset class risk return assumptions. Okay, so given the tight time frame, I kind of skimmed over some of the inputs, but within the advisor tool, you actually set what the assumptions are you want Provisio to use. So you would normally set a default one that just appears when you open each of the modules, and I've been part of both the FinWiz and the charter groups. for each of them they had a published growth rate for each of their different risk profiles. So if I had someone who was a growth client, it might be 7.9% that I was supposed to use based on my dealer group. If they're balanced, it might be 7.2. Whatever it is, I just timed that. I just matched that growth rate to whatever the dealer group published rates were. Because Provisio takes tax out of the calculations, generally use the pension product published rates you've been given, because that's a tax-free product. Just to explain that a bit more detail, so when I run a TTR calc, I use the tax savings being in pension phase versus accumulation as part of what drives TTR. So when you tell me the return is 7.9%, Provisio takes earnings tax out of that for the accumulation fund, but it doesn't take it out for the pension fund. So my apologies if that didn't make a great deal of sense to everybody. If it's an area of interest to you and you want to understand more, just come back to us outside this session and we'll go through it. But yeah, you basically set the growth rates how you want them, and you can vary them. Estate planning was a question that we've been asked about. We are not really an estate planning tool. It's not to say at some point we would never do content for that, but estate planning isn't really an area of optimization where you plug in some numbers and you project something out. And I certainly apologise if the person who asked that question actually feels that it is that way. It's just I'm not an estate planning expert. I've not really been able to think of an optimizer that would do that for you. So at the moment, it's probably not an area we cover off. Is every field in the database available via doc variables? Yes, and then some. So often when you're doing a projection, so for instance, when you do a projection in Provisio, one of the things we do give you the option is to actually go in and have a look at the spreadsheet. So this is the actual spreadsheet that Provisio generated while it ran all the calculations. So it's not designed to be a mysterious black box that you can't understand what it did. This is every number. So we've got one tab for income, one for the level of super contributions, one for the accumulation account, one for the transition pension, one for the tax calcs table, all of those numbers. Now, not every one of these numbers is available as a doc variable, but a considerable number of them are. The ones that we would expect you to want to put into an advice document are all available via doc variables as well. So from that perspective, we have a pretty good coverage for doc variables. But, again, if someone was particularly after something, either you open up the spreadsheet and just pull the numbers out you want and paste it into your document. But if it's something you're going to do consistently, well, just come back to us and maybe we can add the doc variable for you. If we opt to utilise Provisio, would we include training, including case studies? We certainly can do training programs. If I look at what happens with most of our industry funds or bank clients when they're setting up a team to use this, we can run training for them. Usually the training itself might run for half a day if we're covering off every module, and if we wish, we can extend some time to the end of that where we can give you some case studies to run through and just check that you're getting the correct answers as we would expect them to come out. And I guess that gives you some comfort that you're using the system correctly. Are these spreadsheets stored with the SOA to recover? So at the moment, as you generate your content, you choose the stuff to save off for Provisio. But so in terms of, let's say you've got an external CRM to us, then you could save the Word documents and spreadsheets separately. They don't automatically save together, but we do save the advice history in Provisio so that you could reopen the calculation later. So if I go back to my client record for John Smith, each SOA I've generated is basically here with a timestamp of what I've done, and if I click Show Advice, it will actually reopen the calculations I used for that advice and rerun them and show me what I'd used. So we do have that, but if you were after a quite robust compliance process where you wanted to store the exact calculation, then I would save the spreadsheet for each SOA that you've generated. So you'd save the spreadsheet for each of those modules separately. What are our other questions? Thank you. Well, thank you for listening. So that's pretty much my hour done. So hopefully you guys found some value in there. We'll probably come back to you as we've only run a couple of these, so we'll probably come back to some of you guys for feedback and see how it went, see if there's anything we can do to improve the seminar or the webinar process. But yeah, just start playing around with the system, guys, and come back with your thoughts and how you feel about it, because good, bad, or otherwise at this point, we need as much feedback as we can get to understand the things we need to add to this to make it the awesome solution we think it can be. So thank you very much for your time. And it might have been a last question come through. Does it run on XP? It does. So, well, specifically because it's a web-based system, it runs via your browser, but you should be able to get to at least Internet Explorer 8 on XP. It will run on IE8. Ideally, you'll have installed Firefox, Chrome, or anything else, and it will run on all of those just fine. So XP won't be a problem. So, all right, guys, thank you very much for your time, and hopefully I'll speak to you again at some future point. Thanks very much.